The moment my daughter's taillights vanished into the Arizona desert, I thought my life was over. She left me on Highway 93 with no water, no phone, in a 104-degree heat. 3 hours later, a miracle came my way. But surviving wasn't the end of my story. It was just a beginning, because what I did next would change everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments section what time it is where you're watching this. I watched my daughter's brake lights flare red against the endless Arizona desert, and for one stupid moment, I thought she was joking. We'd been arguing for the last 30 miles, her voice getting sharper, mine getting more desperate. The kind of fight where you know you're losing ground with every word, but you keep talking anyway because silence feels like giving up. Vanessa wanted money again. Not alone this time, she made that clear. She wanted her share of what her mother left behind, and she wanted it now. 3 days before Vanessa left me stranded, I'd stood in my driveway in Scottsdale watching her pull up in that silver Honda Accord, and I'd actually felt hope. Real hope. The kind I hadn't felt since burying my wife. "Grand Canyon, here we come," I'd said, loading my duffel bag into her trunk. I'd planned this trip for months, 4 days, just the two of us, the way it used to be when she was younger, before college, before her mother got sick, before everything turned complicated and cold. Vanessa smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I told myself I was imagining things. "Thanks for doing this, sweetheart," I said, climbing into the passenger seat. The car smelled like her perfume. Something expensive I didn't recognize. "I know you're busy with work and everything." "It's fine, Dad." She adjusted the rearview mirror, avoiding my gaze. "We should talk anyway, about Mom's estate." There it was, the real reason she'd agreed to come. I pushed the thought away. "Let's just enjoy the drive first. We've got plenty of time to talk business." She didn't respond, just merged onto the I-17 North and turned up the radio. The first few hours were almost normal. We stopped at Rock Springs Cafe for pie, her mother's favorite place. I ordered Dutch apple. Vanessa got nothing, said she wasn't hungry, then spent 20 minutes on her phone while I ate alone at our booth. When the waitress asked if we wanted anything else, Vanessa looked up long enough to say, "We're good," then went right back to scrolling. "Remember when you were 8? We came here after your soccer tournament. You ate an entire slice of cherry pie and got sick in the parking lot." Yeah, I remember. Flat, emotionless, like I was boring her with my own memories. Back in the car, I tried again, told stories about her mother, about the first time we'd driven this route together, how we'd pulled over to watch the sunset paint the red rocks gold. Vanessa nodded at the right times, but never added anything, never asked questions, just drove. By Wickenburg, the silence had weight to it. I could feel her resentment radiating off her like heat. "Vanessa, if something's bothering you, how much longer are you going to make me wait?" she cut in, her voice suddenly sharp. "Wait for what?" "Don't play dumb, Dad. The money, Mom's life insurance, the house equity. You've been stalling for 2 years. My chest tightened. "I'm not stalling. I'm making sure you're set up properly, that you have a plan. I don't need you to manage my life." Her knuckles went white on the steering wheel. "I need what's mine. Sweetheart, I'm trying to protect you. From what? Being an adult? Making my own choices?" She laughed, bitter and sharp. "Mom would have given it to me. She trusted me." The accusation hung between us like smoke. I wanted to argue, to explain that her mother had specifically asked me to be careful, to make sure Vanessa didn't blow through everything in a year. But I couldn't say that, not without dishonoring my wife's memory. So I stayed quiet. The silence after Wickenburg lasted maybe 10 miles before Vanessa shattered it. "So that's it? You're just not going to answer me?" I'd been staring out the window, watching the desert blur past, trying to figure out how we'd gotten here. How the little girl who used to climb into my lap during thunderstorms had turned into this stranger beside me. "I'm not ignoring you," I said carefully. "I just think we should discuss this calmly." "Calmly?" She barked out a laugh. "Dad, it's been 2 years. 2 years of you treating me like a child who can't handle her own money." "That's not what I'm doing." "Then what do you call it? You're the executor, you control everything, and every time I ask for what Mom left me, you give me excuses. Wait until you're more stable. Let's create a trust. Maybe you should talk to a financial advisor first." My jaw tightened. "Your mother wanted me to make sure you were taken care of, not to just hand you a check and hope for the best." "Taken care of?" Vanessa's laugh was ugly now. "I'm 28 years old. I have a job, an apartment. I don't need you to take care of me." "You're 3 months behind on rent, Vanessa." The words came out harder than I meant them to. The car swerved slightly as her hands jerked on the wheel. "How do you know that?" "Your landlord called me. Said you listed me as an emergency contact." Her face flushed red. "That's none of your business." "It became my business when he asked if I'd co-sign a new lease because you can't prove steady income." I tried to soften my tone. "Sweetheart, I'm not judging you. I just want to help you get on solid ground before—" "Before what? Before you decide I'm worthy of my own mother's money?" She was yelling now, both hands gripping the wheel so tight I thought it might snap. "You know what I think? I think you like having control. It makes you feel important, needed." The accusation hit like a slap. "That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair? Mom died and left everything in your name. The house, the accounts, the life insurance. And you get to play gatekeeper while I have to beg my own father for what's rightfully mine." "I'm not playing anything. I'm trying to honor your mother's wishes. Don't you dare!" Her voice dropped to something cold and venomous. "Don't use Mom as an excuse for your control issues." "Vanessa."
Highway 93 stretched out in both directions like a ribbon of black tar melting under the sun. Nothing but scrub brush and heat shimmer for miles. The temperature gauge on her dashboard read 104 degrees. Through the windshield, the Sonoran Desert looked like God had run out of colors halfway through creation and just stuck with brown. Vanessa put the car in park, but didn't turn off the engine. That should have been my first clue. "Get out," she said. I laughed, actually laughed. "What?" "Get out of my car." Her eyes, my wife's eyes, the same hazel green I used to find so beautiful, were cold, flat, like looking at a stranger wearing my daughter's face. "Vanessa, sweetheart, we're in the middle of nowhere." "I don't care." She leaned across me and popped open the passenger door. Desert heat rushed in like opening an oven. "You've been holding my inheritance hostage for 2 years, making me beg, making me prove I deserve what Mom left me. I'm done." "That's not... I never said lad to prove anything. I just wanted you to be responsible." "Out. Now." The venom in her voice made something crack inside my chest. This wasn't my little girl. This wasn't the Vanessa who used to make me construction paper cards on Father's Day, who cried during The Lion King, who held my hand at her mother's funeral. I stepped out onto the shoulder. The asphalt radiated heat through my sneakers. The air tasted like dust and gasoline. "Vanessa, please, we can talk about this. Whatever you need." She slammed the door before I could finish. Through the window, I saw her jaw set, her hands already shifting into drive. I knocked on the glass, my wedding ring clinking against it. "At least leave me some water. My phone." The tires kicked up a cloud of beige dust as she accelerated. I stood there, choking on grit, watching her taillights shrink to pinpoints on the horizon. Part of me kept expecting her to turn around. Any second now, she'd realize how insane this was. She'd come back. She had to come back. But the desert swallowed those taillights whole, and I was alone. The silence hit me first. No engine hum, no wind, just the hiss of heat rising off the pavement and the distant cry of a hawk circling something dead. The sun pressed down on my head like a physical weight. Sweat soaked through my shirt within minutes. I looked north. Nothing. South. Nothing. East and west, just more nothing. My throat was already dry. That's when I understood. My daughter had just tried to kill me. And standing there, miles from anywhere, watching heat mirages dance across the highway like ghosts, I made myself a promise. If I survived this, everything would change. The man who stepped out of this car would not be the same man who walked back to civilization. My old life ended on Highway 93. What came next would prove that even abandoned in the desert, even left for dead by the person you loved most, you could still reclaim your dignity. The question was no longer whether Vanessa would come back. The question was whether I'd let her in when she did.
The first hour, I walked, because I didn't know what else to do. Highway 93 stretched endlessly in both directions, shimmering like liquid metal under the afternoon sun. I headed south, back toward Wickenburg, toward civilization, because going north meant deeper desert, fewer towns, less hope. My phone sat useless in Vanessa's glove compartment, my wallet too. All I had were the clothes on my back, my wedding ring, and the keys to a house I was suddenly wondering if I'd ever see again. The heat was immediate and absolute. It pressed down on my skull, wrapped around my throat, seeped into my lungs with every breath. Within 20 minutes, my shirt was soaked through. Within 40, my mouth tasted like copper and dust. I should have been furious, should have been cursing Vanessa's name with every step, but all I felt was confusion, a numb, dream-like disbelief that this was actually happening, that my daughter, my only child, had looked me in the eye and chosen this. Where did I go wrong? The question circled my brain like a vulture. Had I been too strict after her mother died? Too lenient? Should I have just given her the money and let her learn her own lessons? Would she really let me die out here? My foot caught on loose gravel and I stumbled, catching myself on trembling legs. The desert silence was oppressive. No cars, no birds, just the hiss of heat rising off the asphalt and the crunch of my sneakers on the shoulder. By the second hour, thinking became difficult. My throat had gone from dry to raw. Every swallow felt like sandpaper. The sun hammered down with physical weight, and I caught myself weaving slightly, my balance going soft at the edges. I knew the signs of heat exhaustion. Worked construction in my 20s, saw guys drop on job sites in weather just like this. Dizziness, nausea, confusion. Your body starts shutting down room by room until there's nothing left but the lizard brain screaming for water. I tried to stay in what little shade the roadside scrub provided, but there wasn't much. Creosote bushes and dried mesquite that barely cast shadows. The landscape looked alien, hostile, like Mars had decided to cosplay as Arizona. How far to Wickenburg? 20 miles? 30? I couldn't remember. The heat was cooking my brain, turning thoughts sluggish and thick. A semi roared past going northbound, and I stumbled into the road waving my arms. The driver never even slowed. Probably never saw me. Just another heat mirage on a lonely highway. That's when the real fear hit me. Not the background worry I'd been carrying. Real fear, the kind that makes your chest tight and your hands shake. I was 62 years old, alone in the desert in 100-degree heat, with no water and no plan. This wasn't just dangerous. This was potentially fatal. My legs felt like concrete. Each step took conscious effort. The world started tilting at weird angles, and I had to stop, hands on knees, waiting for my vision to clear. Keep moving. Just keep moving. But moving where and for what? To survive so I could go home and face the reality that my daughter tried to kill me. The thought should have broken me. Instead, something else flickered to life, something hard and bright beneath the fear. Anger. Not at Vanessa, not yet, at myself, for being weak enough to stand here and consider just lying down in the dust and letting the desert take me. For 2 years I'd been sleepwalking through grief, letting my daughter manipulate me, treating her cruelty like it was somehow my fault. No more. If I made it out of this alive, everything would change. I started walking again, slower now, each step deliberate. The sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil, but I kept moving, because dying out here would prove Vanessa right, would let her win, and I wasn't ready to give her that satisfaction.
I don't remember falling. One moment I was counting my steps, 73, 74, 75, and the next I was on my hands and knees near mile marker 147, staring at pebbles that looked like they were breathing. The asphalt burned through my palms. I tried to stand, but my legs had stopped taking orders. Everything felt distant and muffled, like I was watching myself through dirty glass. This is it, I thought. This is how it ends. Then I heard the air brakes. A Peterbilt cab over, faded blue paint and rust spots, pulled onto the shoulder 50 feet ahead. The driver's door swung open and boots hit the pavement. Work boots, the kind with steel toes and years of oil stains. Jesus Christ, the voice was rough, weathered. Hey, buddy, you hear me? Hands, calloused and strong, gripped my shoulders. A face swam into focus. 50s, maybe 60s. Sun-damaged skin, gray beard, eyes the color of faded denim. The name stitched on his shirt read Dale. "How long you been out here?" he asked. I tried to answer, but my tongue was too thick. Nothing came out but a croak. "Don't talk. Let's get you in the cab." He half carried, half dragged me to the truck. The air conditioning hit like a blessing from God. He pressed a water bottle into my hands. Slow sips, not too fast or you'll puke. The water tasted like life itself. "What happened?" Dale asked, pulling back onto the highway. "Car break down?" I took another sip, my throat loosening enough to form words. "My daughter. She left me." "Left you?" He glanced over, eyebrows raised. "Out here?" "We had a fight." The words felt surreal saying them out loud. "She told me to get out, then she drove away." Dale went quiet for a long moment. The only sound was the diesel engine and the AC blowing cold air across my face. "Your own daughter did this to you?" I nodded. He shook his head slowly, jaw tight. "That ain't right. That ain't right at all." 20 minutes later, we pulled into Kingman Regional Medical Center. Dale helped me through the automatic doors, stayed while they checked me in, and even gave the intake nurse his phone number in case they needed a witness statement. "You gonna be okay?" he asked before leaving. "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. "Thank you, Dale. You saved my life." He shrugged, uncomfortable with the gratitude. "Just did what anyone would do." He paused at the door. "But your daughter, she ain't anyone. She's supposed to be family. You remember that." The ER doctor, a young woman named Dr. Patel, hooked me up to an IV and ran through a checklist. Severe dehydration, first-degree burns on my neck and forearms, core temperature at 102, blood pressure dangerously low. "You're lucky that trucker found you," she said, adjusting the drip. "Another hour out there, we'd be having a very different conversation." I lay there watching saline solution drip into my veins, Dale's words echoing in my skull. She is supposed to be family. But family doesn't leave you to die in the desert. Family doesn't look you in the eye and choose cruelty. The shock was wearing off, and underneath it, something else was building, something cold and sharp and absolutely certain. Vanessa hadn't just abandoned me on that highway. She'd freed me. The hospital bed was too narrow, and the pillows smelt like bleach, but I couldn't sleep anyway. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vanessa's taillights disappearing into the desert heat. So instead, I let myself remember when things were different. She was 4 years old the first time we drove to the Grand Canyon. Her mother, my Claire, sat in the passenger seat with a map spread across her lap, and Vanessa bounced in her car seat singing made-up songs about clouds and horses. Every 10 minutes she'd ask, "Are we there yet?" And every time I'd say, "Getting closer, sweetheart," and she'd giggle like I'd told the funniest joke in the world. When we finally reached the rim, I lifted her onto my shoulders so she could see over the railing. She went completely silent. The kind of silence only a child experiencing wonder can achieve. Then she whispered, "Daddy, did God paint this?" Claire's eyes had filled with tears. Mine too. That was Vanessa, my little girl who saw magic in everything. The IV drip beeped softly in the present, pulling me back, but I let myself slip under again. She was 7, maybe 8 when she started having nightmares. She'd pad down the hallway in her pajamas with the unicorns on them, clutching her stuffed elephant, and crawl into bed between Claire and me. I'd ask what she dreamed about, and she'd say monsters, always monsters. So I'd make up stories about a brave knight named Vanessa who wasn't afraid of anything, who turned monsters into friends with kindness and courage. "Tell me the one about the dragon again," she'd whisper, already half asleep against my chest. I must have told that story 100 times, and every single time she'd fall asleep before I finished, her breathing slow and peaceful, trusting me to keep her safe. When did I stop being able to protect her? The thought stung worse than the sunburn on my neck. I remembered her high school graduation. Claire had been in remission then, 6 months cancer-free, wearing that yellow dress she loved. Vanessa walked across the stage, and when they called her name, she looked right at us in the bleachers and broke into the biggest smile. Afterwards, she ran to us, actually ran, and hugged us both so tight I could barely breathe. "I love you guys," she'd said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "I love you so much." 3 years later, Claire was gone. And Vanessa? She started changing in ways I couldn't quite name at first. The warmth in her eyes cooled. Her visits home became shorter, her conversations clipped. She stopped asking how I was doing and started asking about bank statements, about the house value, about when things would be finalized. I told myself it was grief, that she was processing her mother's death differently than I was, that she needed space to figure things out. But lying in that hospital bed, IV fluids dripping into my dehydrated veins, I finally admitted the truth I'd been avoiding. Vanessa hadn't been grieving her mother. She'd been waiting for her inheritance. The realization felt like drowning. How long had she been pretending? When she'd shown up for Claire's funeral in that black dress, tears streaming down her face, had those tears been real? When she'd held my hand at the graveside and whispered, "We'll get through this together, Dad," had she meant it? Or was I already just an obstacle standing between her and money? I thought about the unicorn pajamas, the dragon stories, the way she used to fall asleep trusting me completely. That little girl was gone. Maybe she'd been gone for years and I'd just been too blind to see it, too desperate to believe that love could survive anything, even greed. A nurse came in to check my vitals, smiled kindly, and left. The room fell quiet again. I stared at the ceiling tiles and let the grief wash over me. Not grief for Claire this time. I'd made my peace with losing her. This was different. This was mourning someone who was still alive, but completely unreachable. My daughter had tried to kill me today. And somewhere out there, she was probably sleeping peacefully, convinced she'd done nothing wrong. The IV drip beeped, the AC hummed, and in the silence, something inside me hardened into resolve.
I couldn't get my little girl back. That door had closed the moment she drove away, but I could make sure she never hurt me again.
The third morning in Kingman, Dr. Patel cleared me for discharge. My burns were healing, my vitals stabilized, but she insisted I rest one more day before traveling. So I lay there in that narrow hospital bed and did something I should have done 2 years ago. I looked back, really looked back. Not through the fog of grief or the desperation to salvage what was left to my family. I looked at the pattern, cold, clear, undeniable. It started 3 weeks after Claire's funeral. Vanessa had called me, sobbing, said her landlord was threatening eviction. She needed $2,000 immediately, or she'd be homeless. I'd driven to Phoenix that same night with a check, held her while she cried, promised her everything would be okay. The eviction notice never materialized, but the calls kept coming. Car repairs, medical bills, a business opportunity that required startup capital. Each time she'd sound desperate. Each time I'd send money. Because that's what fathers do, right? We fix things. We protect our children. Except, looking back now, I saw the pattern she'd been running. She never asked how I was doing, never checked if I was eating, sleeping, managing my own grief. Every conversation started the same way. Small talk for 30 seconds, then the pivot. So, Dad, I wanted to talk to you about something. And I'd feel my stomach tighten, already knowing what came next. The guilt trips were surgical. When I hesitated about releasing more funds, she'd bring up Claire. Mom would have wanted me to have this. Mom trusted me with everything. If Mom were here, she'd understand. She weaponized my dead wife against me. How had I not seen it? I remembered last Christmas. I'd invited Vanessa to Scottsdale, offered to cook her favorite meal, lasagna, the way Claire used to make it. She'd said she was too busy with work. But 2 days after Christmas, she called asking about the life insurance payout timeline. When I'd suggested we discuss it in person, she accused me of playing games and hung up. I didn't hear from her again until March, when she needed money for a security deposit. The hospital room suddenly felt too small. I sat up, ignoring the ache in my sunburned shoulders, and grabbed the notepad the nurse had left on the bedside table. I started writing. Every instance I could remember, every manipulative conversation, every demand disguised as a request, every time she'd made me feel like a bad father for setting boundaries. The list filled 3 pages. 3 pages of evidence that my daughter hadn't been grieving alongside me. She'd been grooming me, training me to respond to her needs immediately, without question, without condition. And whenever I showed signs of resistance, she'd deploy the guilt about Claire, about being family, about how I was failing her. The pattern was so obvious now, it felt like someone had turned on stadium lights in a dark room. She'd manipulated me systematically for 2 years, and I'd let her, because I was drowning in my own grief and desperate to hold on to the only family I had left. Because saying no to Vanessa felt like losing Claire all over again. I'd been so terrified of being alone that I'd accepted being used. That realization hit harder than the desert heat ever had. But here's what Vanessa didn't understand. Abandoning me on Highway 93 hadn't broken me. It had freed me. For the first time since Claire died, I could see clearly. The fog of grief and guilt and desperate love, it had burned away in that desert sun, leaving only truth. My daughter wasn't a grieving young woman who needed guidance. She was a calculating adult who viewed me as an ATM with an inconvenient password. And I was done. The switch flipped in that moment, not dramatically, not with thunder or lightning, just a quiet, certain click.
like a lock turning. I wasn't going to chase her love anymore, wasn't going to beg for scraps of affection or apologize for setting boundaries. I wasn't going to let guilt or grief or the ghost of what we used to be dictate my choices. Vanessa had made her decision on Highway 93. Now I'd make mine. I picked up my phone. The hospital had let me use their landline to cancel my credit cards and order replacements, and made 3 calls. First, to a locksmith in Scottsdale. Change every lock in my house, today. Second, to my attorney, Patricia. Emergency meeting, first available appointment. Third, to my bank. Freeze all accounts, new access codes, new security protocols, everything. When Dr. Patel came by for her final check, she found me sitting up, dressed, ready to leave. "Feeling better?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. And I meant it. "I'm feeling clear." She studied my face, nodded slowly. "Sometimes surviving something changes your perspective." That's exactly what happened. I walked out of Kingman Regional Medical Center 3 days after my daughter tried to kill me. The desert heat hit my face, and instead of flinching, I breathed it in. My old life ended on Highway 93. What came next was entirely up to me. And for the first time in 2 years, that thought didn't scare me. It felt like freedom.
The Uber dropped me at my house in Scottsdale just after noon. The desert sun beat down on the terracotta roof tiles, and the bougainvillea Claire had planted years ago spilled purple blooms over the front wall like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. My legs still felt unsteady as I walked up the driveway. The sunburn on my neck throbbed under my collar. But I wasn't the same man who'd left for the Grand Canyon 4 days ago, full of hope and foolish optimism. That man had died on Highway 93. A white van sat at the curb, "Precision Locksmith" stenciled on the side in bold letters. A guy in his 40s climbed out, toolbox in hand, keys jangling from his belt. "Austin?" he asked. "That's me." "Rick." We shook hands. His grip was firm, professional. "You said all the locks? Front, back, garage?" "Everything." My voice came out steadier than I felt. "I want every entry point changed." He nodded, didn't ask questions. Probably wasn't the first time someone needed to lock another person out of their life. I let him in through the front door, the last time I'd used that key, and watched as he knelt down and began dismantling the deadbolt. The sound of metal scraping against metal filled the entryway. The house felt different, emptier somehow. Claire's absence had always been here, a quiet sadness in every room, but now there was something else, a clearing out, like I was finally making space for whatever came next. Rick worked methodically, unscrewing the old lock cylinder, setting the pins aside on a small towel. He didn't make small talk, and I was grateful. I wasn't ready to explain why I needed this done so urgently. "You want to keep the old keys?" he asked, holding up the brass cylinder. "No." The word came out hard. "Throw them away." He glanced up, something shifting in his expression. Understanding, maybe. "You got it." 15 minutes later, the new lock clicked into place. Rick handed me a set of fresh keys, silver instead of brass, cool and unfamiliar in my palm. "Front door's done. Back door next?" I nodded and followed him through the house to the kitchen. Through the window, I could see the pool where Vanessa used to swim as a kid, the patio where we'd grilled burgers every 4th of July, the orange tree Claire had babied for years until it finally produced fruit. Memories everywhere. But they belonged to a different family, a different version of us that didn't exist anymore. Rick changed the back door lock with the same quiet efficiency, then the garage, then the side gate that led to the yard. With each new lock, each discarded key, I felt something loosening in my chest. Not relief exactly, more like
reclamation. This house was mine, my sanctuary, my space, and I was taking it back. "All set," Rick said, packing up his tools. "You've got 6 new keys total. I'd recommend not giving copies to anyone you don't absolutely trust." "I won't." He paused at the door, looked at me directly. "You doing okay, man? You look like you've been through something." For a second, I considered telling him about the desert, about Vanessa, about how your own child can look you in the eye and choose cruelty. But I just said, "I'm getting there." He nodded. "Whatever happened, sounds like you're handling it right. Sometimes changing the locks is the first step to changing everything else." After he left, I stood in my living room holding those new keys. The house was completely silent. No traffic outside, no neighbors talking, just me and the hum of the AC and the weight of what I'd just done. I'd locked my daughter out. Not just physically, emotionally, financially, completely. And it felt right. I walked to the front door and tested the new lock. Smooth, solid, secure. Vanessa would come eventually, I knew that. She'd show up, demanding entry, demanding explanations, demanding what she thought she deserved. But when she did, she'd find a new lock and an old man who'd finally learned to say no. I pocketed the keys and smiled for the first time in days. My home, my rules, my life. And she was no longer welcome in any of them.
Patricia Winters had been Claire's attorney first, then mine after the funeral. She'd helped us set up the estate plan, the trusts, all the paperwork that's supposed to make death easier on the living. I called her office the morning after the locks were changed. "Austin?" Her voice came through warm but professional. "I got your message. You said it was urgent?" I stood in my kitchen, looking out at the pool, choosing my words carefully. "I need to restructure everything. The will, the trusts, all of it." A pause. "Can I ask what prompted this?" So I told her. Not everything. I couldn't bring myself to detail the full humiliation yet, but enough. The fight, the abandonment, the 3 hours in the desert, the hospital. The silence on her end lasted longer than comfortable. "Jesus, Austin." Her professional tone cracked slightly. "Your own daughter did this?" "Yes." "And you're sure? There's no misunderstanding? No—" "I'm sure, Patricia." My reflection stared back at me from the kitchen window, older than I remembered. She left me on Highway 93 with no water, no phone, in 100-degree heat. The ER doctor said another hour and I wouldn't have made it. I heard papers shuffling. "All right, walk me through what you want to do." "Everything that was earmarked for Vanessa, I want it redirected. The life insurance beneficiary designation, the house inheritance, the investment accounts, all of it." "That's significant, Austin. We're talking about roughly $1.2 million in total assets." The number should have made me hesitate. 2 years ago it would have. But standing in my reclaimed house with new locks on every door, I felt nothing but certainty. "I understand. I want it changed." "To whom? Charity? Other family members?" I'd thought about this all night. Split it. Half to the American Cancer Society in Claire's name, the other half to a trust that funds college scholarships for students who've lost parents to cancer. More silence. Then, "That's beautiful, Austin. Claire would have loved that." My throat tightened. She would have. "What about Vanessa? Do you want to leave her anything? Even a token amount?" I thought about the little girl in unicorn pajamas, the teenager who'd hugged me at graduation, the woman who'd driven away and left me to die. $1, so she can't contest the will by claiming she was accidentally omitted. Patricia exhaled slowly. That sends a very clear message. Good. That's the point. Austin, I have to ask, are you certain?
This kind of decision made in the heat of trauma, sometimes people have regrets later. I've had 2 years to make this decision, Patricia. She's been manipulating me since the funeral, using Claire's memory as a weapon. This wasn't one bad moment. This was her showing me exactly who she's become. All right. Her tone shifted, became all business. I'll draft the amendments. You'll need to come in to sign everything, and we'll need witnesses who aren't beneficiaries. How long? I can have documents ready by Friday. But Austin, once this is done, once you sign, Vanessa will be legally cut out. There's no easy way back from this. I thought about her face through the car window, the coldness in her eyes, the hatred in that single word, out. I don't want a way back. She made her choice. Now I'm making mine. Then I'll see you Friday at 10. And Austin, for what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Nobody deserves to be treated that way. Not even family. Especially not family. After we hung up, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was going about her life. Maybe she felt guilty. Maybe she'd convinced herself I deserved it. Maybe she hadn't thought about me at all. But soon, maybe this week, maybe next, she'd come looking for what she thought was hers. And she'd discover that the father she'd left to die in the desert had done something she never expected. He'd survived, and he'd made sure she'd never be able to hurt him again.
Desert Financial Credit Union looked the same as it always had. Modern lobby, fake plants, tellers behind plexiglass. But I walked in feeling like a different person. The branch manager, a woman named Sophia Chen, met me in her office. We'd spoken briefly over the phone, but she'd insisted I come in person for the level of changes I was requesting. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, gesturing to a chair, "I understand you need to make some significant account modifications?" "I need to remove someone from all access," I said. "Vanessa Caldwell, my daughter." Sophia's fingers paused over her keyboard. "She's currently listed as a secondary account holder on your checking and savings, plus she's a beneficiary on the CDs and money market accounts. I want all of that removed, today. May I ask?" "She tried to kill me." The words came out flat, factual. "Left me stranded in the desert with no water. I nearly died." Sophia's professional mask slipped. Her eyes widened. "I'm so sorry. I can't imagine." Neither could I, until it happened. I pulled out my driver's license. "What do you need from me?" She recovered quickly, typing with renewed focus. "I'll need your signature on several forms, and I'd recommend setting up fraud alerts, changing your PIN, updating your security questions, basically creating a completely new security profile. Whatever it takes." For the next 40 minutes, we worked through everything, every account Vanessa had ever touched, every authorization she had ever received, systematically erased. She pulled up transactions going back 2 years, and I saw it all laid out in black and white. March, $2,000 withdrawal. May, $1,500. July, $3,200. October, $2,800. On and on. Nearly $40,000 over 2 years. Money I'd convinced myself was helping her get stable. Money she'd extracted through guilt and manipulation. "Would you like copies of these transactions?" Sophia asked gently. "Yes, for my attorney." She printed everything, placed it in a folder marked confidential, and slid it across the desk. When we finished, she walked me back to the lobby. At the door, she hesitated. "Mr. Caldwell, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I've seen a lot of financial abuse, usually spouses or caregivers. But parents protecting themselves from their own children? That takes real courage." "Or desperation," I said. "Maybe both." I left the bank with that folder under my arm and something unfamiliar blooming in my chest. Not happiness exactly, more like solidity. For 2 years I'd been bleeding money and dignity, and I'd finally cauterized the wound. My truck was parked across the street.
But instead of heading straight there, I found myself walking down Scottsdale Road toward the shopping district. There was a jewelry store Claire and I used to browse, Silverman's, family-owned for 40 years. I hadn't been inside since before she died. The owner, Mr. Silverman himself, looked up as the bell chimed. "Can I help you?" "I want to buy a watch. Something that'll last." He smiled like he understood more than I'd said. "Special occasion?" "New beginning." He led me to a case of men's watches, not the flashy expensive ones, but solid, well-made pieces. I pointed to a stainless steel Citizen with a simple face, no frills, no complications, just reliable timekeeping. "This one." "Excellent choice. Eco-drive, so it's solar-powered, never needs a battery. You take care of it, it'll outlast you." While he boxed it up, I looked at my reflection in the display case mirror. Same face, same gray hair, but something in my eyes had changed. They looked alert, present, alive. "Will this be cash or card?" Mr. Silverman asked. "Card. My card. My account." He ran it through, handed me the bag. "Wear it in good health." Outside, I strapped the watch onto my wrist. It felt good, substantial, like I'd given myself permission to invest in a future that belonged to me alone. For 2 years, every dollar I'd spent had been shadowed by guilt. Guilt about surviving when Claire didn't. Guilt about not doing enough for Vanessa. Guilt about existing as anything other than a resource to be depleted. But standing there on Scottsdale Road with the afternoon sun warm on my face and a new watch ticking on my wrist, I felt something I hadn't felt since before Claire got sick. Freedom. Not the freedom of having nothing left to lose. The freedom of knowing exactly what I was worth protecting.
She showed up 6 days after the desert. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard her key scraping in the front door lock. Once, twice, 3 times, each attempt more forceful than the last. Then the pounding started. "Dad, open the door right now!" Her voice carried through the wood, sharp with confusion, turning to anger. "My key doesn't work." I set down my coffee mug, checked my new watch. 8:37 in the morning. I'd been awake since 5, half expecting this. I walked to the door but didn't open it. It doesn't work because I changed the locks. Silence. Then, "What? You heard me?" "Dad, open this door right now!" The pounding resumed, harder. "We need to talk." "We can talk just fine like this." "I'm not having a conversation through a closed door like some kind of criminal." The irony almost made me laugh. "Vanessa, you left me on Highway 93 to die. You don't get to decide how we communicate anymore." "I didn't." She stopped. Started again. "I was angry. I needed space. I assumed you'd call someone, or—" "With what phone? You drove off with it." "Your phone was in your pocket." "No," I said calmly. "It was in your glove compartment, along with my wallet." Another pause, shorter this time. "Well, you obviously survived." The casual dismissal in her voice, like I had inconvenienced her not dying, hit different than I expected. Not painful, just clarifying. A trucker named Dale found me collapsed 3 hours later. The ER doctor said my core temperature was 102. Another hour and we wouldn't be having this conversation. "Dad, I'm sorry, okay? I lost my temper. I made a mistake. Can we please do this inside?" "No." "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, you're not coming in. Not today, not ever." The pounding stopped. I heard her breathing hard on the other side of the door. When she spoke again, her voice had shifted. Softer, younger, the voice she used to use when she wanted something. "Daddy, please. I know I messed up. I was just so frustrated with you controlling everything. Can't we just talk about this?" My hand was on the doorknob.
For a second, muscle memory almost took over. All those years of opening doors, fixing problems, being the father who made everything okay. But I thought about the desert, the hospital, the 3 pages of manipulation I documented, the $40,000 in withdrawals. I stepped back from the door. Vanessa, I've spent 2 years making excuses for you, telling myself your anger was grief, that you'd get better once you processed losing your mom. But you didn't leave me on that highway because you were grieving. You did it because you're cruel. That's not fair. You want to talk about fair? You used your mother's death to manipulate me. You demanded money while I was still crying at her funeral. You made me feel guilty for trying to protect you from yourself. Protect me? Her voice went high and sharp. You were controlling me. You kept my inheritance. Your mother left that money to me, Vanessa, to distribute as I saw fit. And you know what she told me before she died. She said, don't let Vanessa waste it. Make sure she's ready. You're lying. I'm not. And deep down, you know I'm not. Silence. Then something hit the door. Her hand, maybe. Or her head. When she spoke again, the little girl voice was gone. What replaced it was ice. Let me in, Dad. I have a right to be in that house. No, you don't. Not anymore. Half of that house is mine. Mom wanted you to grow up. She wanted you to be responsible, kind, compassionate. Instead, you tried to kill your father for insurance money you're not entitled to. I want what's mine. Then get a lawyer, because you're not getting in here. I heard her breathing change, fast, shallow, rage building. You're going to regret this. I'll fight you on everything. The house, the accounts, Mom's trust, all of it. Go ahead. My attorney's already prepared for that. What does that mean? It means I've made some changes, Vanessa. Changes you're not going to like. What kind of changes? I looked at the new lock. Solid. Secure. Mine. The kind you should have expected when you left me to die. Dad! Goodbye, Vanessa. I walked back to the kitchen. Behind me, she screamed something I couldn't quite make out. Then more pounding, then her car door slamming, tires squealing as she tore out of the driveway. I picked up my coffee. It had gone cold, but I drank it anyway. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the strange, powerful feeling of finally standing my ground. For the first time in 2 years, I'd said no to my daughter, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it felt like it was just beginning.
She called 17 times that first day. I let every call go to voicemail. The messages started apologetic, then turned demanding, then devolved into threats. I listened to each one once, saved them all, and sent copies to Patricia. On the 3rd day, she showed up again. This time, I was ready. I'd been expecting it. I met her at the door, still closed, still locked, but this time, I had something to say. Vanessa, I'm going to talk, and you're going to listen. Dad, if you just... No. My turn. My voice was steady, calm. I'd practiced this. For 2 years, you've manipulated me, used your mother's memory as a weapon, made me feel guilty for trying to protect you. And I let you, because I was drowning in grief and terrified of losing the only family I had left. I'm not finished. I took a breath. You left me on Highway 93 to die, not in a moment of passion. You made a calculated choice. You looked at your father and decided your inheritance was worth more than my life. Silence on the other side of the door.
Here's what's going to happen. I've changed my will. You are no longer a beneficiary. The money your mother left is going to cancer research and scholarships. The house, the accounts, all of it, none of it is coming to you. You can't. I already did. It's legal, it's final, and my attorney assures me it's ironclad. I heard something slam, her fist against the doorframe maybe. I'm your daughter. Yes, you are. The words hurt to say, but they needed saying. And I will always be your father. That's not something I can change, even if I wanted to. But here's what I can change. I will not be your victim. Not anymore. Victim? You're being dramatic. You tried to kill me, Vanessa. You took everything I gave you, and it was never enough. You weaponized grief, manipulated guilt, and when I finally tried to set boundaries, you left me to die in the desert. I made a mistake. No, a mistake is losing your temper and saying something cruel. A mistake is slamming a door. What you did was attempted murder. And the only reason I'm not pressing charges is because I don't want to spend what's left of my life in courtrooms. So that's it? You're just cutting me off? I'm setting a boundary. If you ever get help, real help, therapy, whatever it takes to address why you've become this person, my door might open again. Might. But until then, you're not welcome in my life. This is insane. Mom would be horrified. Your mother would be heartbroken, I said quietly. But she'd understand. She asked me to protect you from yourself. I failed at that. But I won't fail at protecting myself from you. The silence stretched long enough that I thought she'd left. Then I heard it. Not crying. Something worse. Laughter. Cold and bitter. You'll regret this. You'll die alone, old man. And when you do, I'll still get everything. That's how inheritance works. Actually, when I die, you'll get a copy of my will and exactly $1. Just enough to prove you weren't forgotten. You were chosen against. You hateful. Goodbye, Vanessa. I walked away from the door while she was still yelling. Back to the kitchen. Back to my coffee and my quiet house and my new life. She screamed for another 5 minutes. Then her car started. Then silence. I stood at the kitchen window watching the empty driveway. My chest felt tight, but not with grief. With something cleaner. Something like closure. I'd lost my daughter years ago. Probably before Claire even died. I'd just been too desperate to admit it. But I found something else. Something I thought I'd buried with my wife. Myself. The cycle was broken. The manipulation was over. And for the first time since Claire's funeral, I could breathe without the weight of someone else's expectations crushing my chest. I raised my coffee mug to the empty driveway. Goodbye, sweetheart. I hope you find what you're looking for. But you won't find it here. Then I turned away and got on with the business of living. The house felt different after Vanessa left. Not empty. It had been empty since Claire died. But peaceful. Like a storm had finally passed and left behind clear skies. I spent that evening doing something I hadn't done in 2 years. I went through Claire's photo albums. They were stored in the hall closet, 3 leather-bound books she'd meticulously organized by year. I carried them to the living room, poured myself a glass of the whiskey we'd saved for special occasions, and started at the beginning. There was Claire at 25, holding newborn Vanessa in the hospital. The way she looked at that baby, like she was staring at a miracle. I remembered taking that photo, remembered the exhaustion and joy radiating off her, remembered thinking I was the luckiest man alive. I flipped through the years. Vanessa's first steps, her first day in kindergarten with that gap-toothed smile, birthday parties and Halloween costumes and Christmas mornings. Every page was evidence of how much we'd loved that little girl. But somewhere along the way, the little girl disappeared. I found a photo from Vanessa's 16th birthday. We'd taken her to her favorite restaurant, some Italian place in Phoenix she'd been begging to try. In the picture, Claire sat beside her, both of them laughing at something I'd said off camera. Vanessa's eyes were bright, genuine, happy. When had that changed? When had happiness turned to entitlement, love to manipulation? I didn't have an answer. Maybe there wasn't one. I set the album aside and picked up a framed photo from the end table, one I'd turned face down after Claire's funeral because looking at it hurt too much. It was from our 20th anniversary. Just the two of us at the Grand Canyon, the same place Vanessa would later try to lure me to my death. Claire's hair was blowing in the wind, and she was looking at me instead of the view, smiling like I'd just said something ridiculous. I'd taken 100 photos that day. This was the only one I'd printed. "What would you tell me to do?" I asked the photo. "Would you say I'm being cruel, or would you understand?" The house stayed quiet, but I could almost hear her voice. Claire had been kind, but she hadn't been a pushover. She'd set boundaries with people who'd tried to take advantage. She'd walked away from toxic friendships without looking back. She would have understood. More than that, she would have been proud. I thought about Dale, the trucker who'd saved my life, how he'd looked at me when I told him my daughter had done this. The quiet anger in his voice. That ain't right. He was a complete stranger, and he'd shown me more compassion in 20 minutes than my own daughter had in 2 years. That meant something. I pulled out my laptop and opened a search engine. Typed, "Support groups for parents estranged from adult children." Pages of results appeared. Forums, therapists, community centers. Thousands of parents sharing stories that sounded eerily like mine. Children who'd become strangers. Families torn apart by money, addiction, entitlement, mental illness. I wasn't alone. The realization hit harder than I expected. For 2 years, I'd carried this shame. The belief that I'd somehow failed as a father, that Vanessa's cruelty was proof of my inadequacy. But reading these stories, I understood. Sometimes you can do everything right and still lose your child to forces beyond your control. Sometimes love isn't enough. I bookmarked a few resources, made a note to call a therapist Patricia had recommended. Maybe I'd even start attending a support group, not because I needed permission to move on, but because other parents in my situation might need to hear that survival was possible, that you could lose your child and still build a life worth living. I closed the laptop and looked around my living room. New locks on the doors, new security on my accounts, new clarity about who I was and what I deserved. But more importantly, new purpose. Claire and I had always talked about volunteering once we retired, working with kids who'd lost parents. Maybe that's where I'd start. Use what I'd learned about grief, about manipulation, about boundaries, to help families before they reach the breaking point. Turn my pain into something useful. I picked up Claire's photo again, studied her face in the canyon wind. "I'm going to be okay," I told her. "I'm going to do more than survive this. I'm going to live again." Outside, the Arizona sunset painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, the same colors I'd seen that day on Highway 93 when I thought I'd die in the desert heat. But I didn't die. I'd been reborn. People talk about unconditional love like it's the highest virtue,
Like real love means accepting anything, forgiving everything, keeping doors open no matter how much damage walks through them. But I'd learned something in that hospital bed, something I wished I'd understood years ago. Sometimes love means closing the door. Not because you hate the person on the other side, not because you want revenge or to cause pain, but because keeping it open means sacrificing yourself. And there's nothing noble about that. There's nothing loving about letting someone destroy you in the name of family. Real love, the kind that sustains and nurtures and builds, requires boundaries. It requires saying no. It protects your soul. Vanessa might never understand that. She might spend the rest of her life convinced I was the villain in our story. But I knew the truth, and so did Claire, wherever she was. I'd chosen dignity over destruction, peace over pain, myself over the ghost of who Vanessa used to be. And that wasn't cruelty. That was survival. I raised my whiskey glass to Claire's photo one last time. To new beginnings, I said, and to knowing when to close the door. Then I drank, set down the glass, and turned towards whatever came next. Because I was 62 years old, and my life wasn't over. It was just beginning. So here's my question for you. Was I right to handle it this way? Tell me in the comments below. What would you have done in my position? If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button, subscribe for more real-life tales, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next one. Because trust me, there's so much more on my channel. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next life story.